Now, before too long, we're going to turn this over to questions for the audience, but I want the panelists to talk just a little bit among themselves. And just for purposes of opening the debate and getting the ball rolling, I'm going to ask Andy a question, and then I'm going to ask Steve to comment on Andy's answer.
Getting out the boxing gloves.
Andy, in your remarks, you spent a great deal of time talking about equality as a standard for measuring how well we're doing, and talked about one of the great risks being the growing inequality of wealth and income in America between the top 10 or 20% of what you have it, and then the bottom 10 or 20% and what you have it. And the question I have for you is, why should equality of income be the measuring rod in this whole area? Because as Steve was pointing out, these different cohorts and percentiles are not static, and people are moving up and down between them all the time. And that's one point. Another point would be, does equality dull incentives? And Abraham Lincoln said many, many years ago that some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. And so from the standpoint of fluidity and the standpoint of maintaining incentives, why have equality be the lens through which we look at this whole issue?
So first of all, it's probably unusual for a labor leader to call Steve Forbes very 20th century, and he should get into the 21st century, because a lot of the things that once were true are no longer true, including what you just said, which is if you begin to look, and there's some studies that I'm sure Richard or others at, there is a growing body of belief and evidence that people are no longer moving through those quintiles like they used to. So A, that used to be true in the 21st century for the reasons which we could go into of a very different kind of global economy. It is not necessarily true anymore. B, I don't think we're talking about equality of outcomes. I think we're talking about equality of opportunities. And I think this country has always believed in equality of opportunity, whether it's education, whether it's, access to the entrepreneurial opportunities that exist, whether, it's the right to vote or other kinds of things. I think I tried to say, obviously not very good, I don't believe we're going to ever have the equality of outcomes. And then the question becomes is, as Steve and I might disagree, what do we do in situations where people take responsibility for their family, they work really hard, their job got sent overseas, there is no job in their community, and Steve might say, well, we make sure they show up at the hospital or we give them some food. I would say there's a different minimum standard we should have in America, but I think what's made this country great is we have decided that hard work should pay, that the rules of equal opportunity should exist, and when they don't exist, we are Americans and we don't let people suffer.
Yes, Steve, Andy's making 2 points there. Number one is that the fluidity you're talking about in America no longer exists, and that equality of opportunity has been severely restricted and stunted. And I'd like to hear what you say in response to those 2 points that Andy made.
Well, in terms of the fluidity, that IRS study goes to the middle of this decade, 2 years before the crisis hit in 2007, and so I think that still holds up, especially when you consider, unlike other developed countries, we take in a lot of immigrants. Again, put aside legal or illegal, most of these people come here with very little but the desire to get ahead. And given a chance, most of them end up doing it, and certainly their kids end up doing it. In terms of the quality of opportunity in a global economy, that hits on a couple of things. One is a key thing for competing in this global economy today is a basis of knowledge. Our schools are not doing in many areas the job they should, in large part because they don't have competition and therefore lack of accountability. I'm involved peripherally with several charter schools in Harlem, New York, where they are able to do what's right for the kids. And within 3 years, those kids, in terms of test scores, even though they're chosen by lot, not picked for particular attributes, but come in and if you have room, you're here. Within 3 years, they're vastly outpacing their peers in other schools in terms of math, in terms of English, in terms of writing capabilities. So if our schools get their act together, we won't have these in some of these school districts and cities where you have a 75% dropout rate. That is hurting us gratuitously because we don't have the schools working right. In terms of jobs, most jobs are destroyed, even though some do go overseas. Most job destruction is within this country. Each week, amazingly, in a normal economy, 500,000 jobs are destroyed, and about 540,000 jobs are created. Just give one example, the railroad industry. After World War II, the railroad industry was one of the biggest employers in this country, 1.2 million workers. Today, even though Warren Buffett just put an offer out for one the other day, today's railroads carry about 6 times as much freight as they did back then, with 180,000 workers. Those million jobs lost in the railroad industry didn't go to China or to call centers in Ireland or elsewhere. They just disappeared. You saw the same thing in agriculture. So the key thing is, do you have a dynamic economy that is creating new industries, new jobs, and the like? And in terms of people who get displaced, most do find jobs. If they don't, and we're not doing it in this recession, and the reason we're not doing it in this recession is because the credit system is not working, because of small businesses having a hard time, especially new businesses, getting a normal flow of credit. I don't, again, want to get in the whole monetary situation, but the Federal Reserve has done I'll be kind since we're being taped, a half-baked job in terms of getting the credit system working again. In terms of distribution of wealth, one of the most maldistributions of wealth is precisely what happened, and it pains me to say it as a Republican, but the biggest domestic mistake of the Bush administration was its weak dollar policy, an absolute disaster when you trash the dollar, and I'm surprised the new administrations continued that disastrous policy. Bill Clinton never allowed that to happen. Reagan didn't allow it to happen. John Kennedy didn't allow it to happen. But when you have allowed the dollar to go down the proverbial toilet, guess what happens? You get inflation in commodities, which brings huge redistributions of wealth to nice people like Venezuela, the Middle East, Russia, and elsewhere, gratuitous. And it also hurts our standard of living when the dollar becomes cheaper. That does hit the standard of living, just as we saw in the 1970s. So if we get back to basic principles in terms of starting with sound schooling, in terms of removing barriers, getting the government to get its act together, I think we're going to surprise the world with what we do in terms of innovation. But if we continue to put up barriers, we're going to end up like Western Europe, very nice standard of living as long as you're not young, very high youthful unemployment even before the economic crisis, and innovation goes elsewhere. Just one example, Cisco, great technological powerhouse. John Chambers done a fantastic job. Who's his biggest competitor in the world today? A company most of you haven't heard of, Huawei, Chinese company, $30 billion. Others are learning about technology. All the more reason to remove barriers, not put in barriers. But the most maldistribution, and Wall Street. How did Wall Street get so rich in the last particularly the last 4 or 5 years? It was because of the cheap dollar policy and what the Fed did. That was a maldistribution. Again, if the government had got its act together, that could never have happened. If you have a stable dollar, you can't make money trading currencies very much, and commodity volatility goes down if the dollar is stable. So if you don't like Wall Street, go to Bernanke and Greenspan and say, what the H-E-double-L were you doing?
Now, Jed and Richard, then I promise I'll give you a shot. Jed, do you want to enter into this conversation? One of the things Steve is talking about is that if we all grant that equality of opportunity is something we want to enhance, we need to start concentrating on competitiveness in schools and promoting school choice, and we need to eliminate barriers to incentives and the rest, that we need to incentivize the economy rather than to redistribute. And what's your general reaction to the conversation that Steve and Andy have been having?